one of the big ones for us is how it actually meets the current processes and methodologies of how we work with the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions, which is a lot different than state law enforcement. From a Commonwealth perspective, my investigators and my area is tasked to produce a brief of evidence to give to the DPP so they can decide whether or not a prima facie case exists. So rather than from a state perspective, we actually have to produce the brief of evidence a lot sooner, and then the Commonwealth Prosecution Service then decides whether or not the Commonwealth is going to run with the matter. Now, historically, that meant that an agency would run a protracted investigation over a long period of time, relying on, the investigator's experience. And, 20 years ago, it used to be, where's the indictment handbook? What are we looking at, the elements of the events? 6 to 12 months down an investigation, the senior investigator finally drags out the evidence matrix and tries to join all the dots together. From the elementised offence side of things, where it's looking at the evidence against the offences straight away, that's removed from, that process is being done in the background, So we've found this digital format of when it's elementised, you can have a very experienced investigator running the matter, and they're using their experience just to do what they've normally done, and they'll put it in the system. But also with junior investigators, the system itself is guiding them through the investigation. They are looking at what it's sort of telling them what evidence they need to go out and get. So it's user friendly from both sides, but our links to the DPP is probably the biggest thing. As I said before, we would work for months, if not years, on investigations. We would give a brief of evidence to the CWP, they would review it, and the prosecutor would have a different slant or want different piece of evidence, and it would come back, and you would have to pretty much start all over again. Now, luckily, with a lot of work between the Commonwealth agencies and the CWP, pre-brief advice has changed, and this is probably where I see the biggest benefit with the digitised brief format and the way we're currently working with CWP, is that we now engage the prosecution service at the commencement of an investigation, not at the dissemination of the brief. So we can now then allow the DPP or the senior prosecutor to look at our cases that's going along, and they can then make a comment, as Craig, you said before, they can task to say, okay, well, they need this piece of evidence, or they need that person approached, especially from a hazardous waste space from the Commonwealth, because it is very scientifically based. And every single investigation has a slightly different slant of what evidence is required to meet the proof of the offence. So we need that engagement from the prosecution service straight away. And it's that to and fro, being able to, from a digital format, and be able to get instantaneous feedback from the prosecution service, even before, from a Commonwealth perspective, an indictment's even, charges are even laid.
Yeah.
So we're already there. The only other thing I'd probably touch on before we get to Jason is where I see it from my perspective as an investigations manager is my ability to QAR jobs. I can look at a case being run, and I can look at the elementised things in the system and say, has this element of this offence been met, yes or no? And I can clearly see it. And if it isn't, the brief can't go, and the brief won't be disseminated. The quality assurance process is an awful lot quicker. So regardless of, we're looking at maybe 50% plus time savings on the preparation of the brief. Just the QAR side, from my perspective as a senior manager, is, vastly improved.
Yeah.
I could go on, but, for me, it's sort of like going back to the future. We look at, as I said, 25 years ago, I think every detective was given the indictment handbook and say, this is what you need to work under. You don't need that anymore because the digitised system's doing it for you.
Yeah, so that's a really good point you raised about the DPP being involved, Commonwealth DPP involved at earlier stage of the investigation, because if you look back at, like I mentioned before, is all those reviews into state-based criminal justice processes, they're all basically saying the same thing, is that, the brief needs to be commenced from the start, and the prosecutors and legal reps, they need to be accessed and involved in brief at the earliest opportunity, so they can. One of the key things I remember from, I think it was the Moynihan reviews, is about it allows them to undertake pre-conference trials with defence to try and negotiate, to streamline those proceedings. But if they don't have the brief at the early stage, then they just can't have those conferences. So it's interesting how those reviews at state-based law enforcement are focused on exactly what the Commonwealth DPP are doing with agencies like yours.